Hi everyone.
I honestly don't know if I'm here for advice or just some peace of mind, but I really need to get this off my chest. My wife, Kay, and I have been together for a little over 5 years. We met through mutual friends at a casual hangout. Nothing dramatic or storybook-like, just two people who clicked over corny jokes and late-night music playlists. For the first few years, our relationship felt comfortable and steady, the kind of thing you barely question because everything just works. But these past few months, something shifted. It's hard to explain without sounding paranoid, but I started to notice small cracks I'd never seen before. It was like our once relaxed vibe turned tense, and I couldn't figure out why. At first, I blamed it on stress. She'd complain about work issues, long hours, and burnout. I wanted to be supportive, so I brushed off my uneasy feeling and tried to be the understanding partner. Still, there was this dull ache in my gut telling me something was off. I kept ignoring it, convinced that I was just being insecure. I mean, after all these years, why would I doubt her now? But then things started piling up. Stray comments, weird phone calls, and one particular night she came home acting like she'd just seen a ghost. That was when I realized something big was going on. I'm sharing this now because everything finally blew up in a way I never saw coming, and I'm still trying to piece it all together. If I'd known how bad it would get, maybe I would have paid more attention to those early warnings. Maybe I would have asked harder questions. But hindsight is always clearer, right? Anyway, that's the short version of how I got to this point. There's so much more to the story, the unraveling, the discovery, and yes, what I did about it. Let's just say I ended up showing everyone exactly what was going on behind my back, and it happened in the most dramatic setting possible. Her own parents' party. I'll explain how it all went down next. It started with little things that most people wouldn't even notice. Kay would come home later and later, claiming there was some sudden crisis at work, every single time. Or she'd hide her phone screen the moment I walked into the room, saying she was just talking to a coworker about a project. It felt weird, but I couldn't pinpoint anything concrete, so I tried to shrug it off. I convinced myself I was being the jealous husband who needed to chill. But then she got really good at dodging questions. I'd ask casual stuff like, "How was your day?" Simple things you ask your partner, right? Instead of responding with her usual half-joking complaints about her boss or the typical office drama, she'd just give short, vague answers. Sometimes she'd avoid eye contact altogether. One night, I caught her staring at her phone with this huge grin, but when I walked over, she immediately locked it and placed it screen-side down. My heart sank. That wasn't like her at all. I tried to be direct about my worries once. We were having dinner, and I mentioned that she seemed distant. I'll never forget the look she gave me. It was almost guarded. She swore up and down that I was imagining things, that she was just overworked and needed space. I didn't want to push her, so I backed off, feeling guilty for even bringing it up. A couple of nights later, though, she came home looking downright terrified. She gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. No eye contact. Muttered something about being exhausted, and went straight to shower. The anxious vibe in the room was so thick I could practically feel it pushing me out. It was the moment I realized this was no ordinary rough patch. Something bigger was going on, and I had to find out what. I remember the exact moment everything fell into place. It happened on a random Tuesday night. Kay had dozed off on the couch after dinner, and her phone started buzzing with non-stop notifications. Normally, I just ignore it or hand it to her, but something about the sheer number of alerts made me pick it up. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I could feel my hands starting to sweat. I knew this could be an invasion of privacy, but at that point, I was desperate for answers. When I unlocked her phone, she'd once casually mentioned the code to me, back when we actually trusted each other. I saw a string of messages from an unknown number. They were definitely not about work. The conversation was full of pet names and inside jokes I'd never heard before, like they had their own little world. My mind started racing, and I felt my stomach twist into knots. But the worst part? There was a video file attached. I hesitated for a second, thinking, do I really want to see this? Do I want the truth or my peace? In the end, my need to know overpowered my fear. I tapped the video and watched in stunned silence as my wife, my partner for years, shared intimate moments with a man I'd never met. couldn't breathe. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. For a solid minute, it felt like the room was spinning. All those late nights, all the excuses. It all made sense now. There it was, laid out in front of me in a few gut-wrenching seconds of footage. My thoughts collided in a jumbled mess. Anger, heartbreak, betrayal. I was furious at her, furious at myself for not trusting my instincts, and even more furious at the person who had sent this video to gloat. When I finally managed to pull myself together, I saved the file onto my own device. I wasn't sure why. Maybe part of me wanted it as proof, something nobody could deny. Another part of me just couldn't let go of the shock. I needed to keep that evidence on hand, if only to remind myself this was real. I turned off the phone, set it back beside her, and walked into our bedroom, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might wake her up. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I just lay there, replaying the video in my head, feeling my world collapse into a million pieces. By morning, one thing was clear. This was bigger than just some rough patch, and I couldn't keep quiet about it any longer. I barely got through breakfast the next morning. Every time I looked at Kay, I flashed back to that video and felt sick. My coffee tasted like chalk, and I could hardly meet her eyes. She noticed something was off because she kept asking if I was feeling okay, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything with her calmly stirring sugar into her mug like nothing had changed. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I asked her, straight out, who the guy was in the messages I'd seen on her phone. The second the words left my mouth, she froze. Her face went pale, and for a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then came the deflection. "What are you talking about?" She tried to play innocent, but her voice was shaky. I pulled out my phone, tapping the screen to open the saved video, and told her I knew everything. That's when she switched from feigned confusion to defense. She insisted I must have misunderstood, that it was just a stupid mistake, that I didn't have the full story. The panic in her voice was gut-wrenching. I'd never seen her so desperate, and yet I felt strangely numb. It was like a barrier snapped into place around my heart the moment I watched that video. All I could think was, this is who you really are? I wanted to yell, to cry, to demand answers. But instead, I found myself going eerily calm. I asked her how long it had been going on, how she could lie so easily for so long. She offered a string of excuses. She felt neglected. She was lonely. She didn't know how to talk to me about her problems. Each excuse felt like a slap in the face. I'd always done my best to be there for her, and I couldn't understand how she could justify any of this by blaming me. When she realized I wasn't buying her stories, she grew hostile. She told me I had no right to look at her phone. Like that was the real crime here. It was surreal watching someone I loved so fiercely pivot from shame to anger, all in a matter of minutes. I just stood there, my heart pounding and my jaw clenched, wondering how we ever got to this place. I told her point blank that I was done with the lies. The only thing I wanted was honesty. If she couldn't give me that, then we had no future left to talk about. She didn't say a word. She just stared at me, eyes brimming with tears and indignation. That was when I realized our world was truly shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. I can't put into words how hollow I felt once that initial confrontation ended. It was like someone had flipped a switch inside me, shutting off all the warmth and trust I'd ever built with Kay. I spent a couple of nights crashing on our couch, not because I thought it would fix anything, but because I couldn't stand being in the same bed with her. The silence between us was suffocating. Neither of us knew how to move forward, and truthfully, I wasn't sure I even wanted to. I'd go to work, but my mind stayed stuck in an endless loop, replaying the moment I discovered the video. Whenever I tried to distract myself or get lost in a spreadsheet, I work a desk job, I'd slip right back into that nauseating memory. I wasn't sleeping, barely eating, and when friends asked if something was up, I'd just say I was tired. I wasn't ready to share this nightmare with anyone yet. It all felt too raw, too personal. Kay tried to talk to me a few times, but every attempt ended in a fight or a bout of awkward silence. She swung back and forth between apologetic tears and frustrated anger, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Part of me wanted to scream at her until my voice gave out, Another part wanted to lock myself away and pretend none of this was happening. Neither option felt right. The worst was going to sleep at night. My mind filled with 1,000 what-ifs and regrets, picking apart every memory to see where I could have done better. What if I'd just been more attentive? What if I'd asked the hard questions sooner? It's the kind of mental spiral that leaves you feeling guilty for someone else's betrayal. Amid all that turmoil, one thing kept hitting me like a gut punch. That video. I still had it saved on my phone. The evidence was right there, staring at me every time I considered giving Kay the benefit of the doubt. It was proof that our marriage was built on a lie, at least in that moment. Sometimes I wondered if I should just delete it to find some closure, but I couldn't. It felt like the only piece of solid truth in a sea of uncertainty. I wasn't sure what I'd do next, or how I'd even start picking up the pieces. All I knew was that I wasn't the same person I'd been before pressing play on that video. If everything up to now was an emotional freefall, I could sense I was about to hit the ground hard. And I had no idea if Kay would be there to catch me, or if she'd be the reason I couldn't get back up at all. A few days after our confrontation, Kay's mom called to invite us to a family get-together at their place. Apparently, it was some sort of delayed celebration for her parents' anniversary, or maybe just an excuse to gather everyone under one roof. Normally, we'd jump at the chance to hang out with them. They've always been warm and supportive. But this time, I felt sick at the thought of smiling through small talk when my entire life was upside down. Yet something about that invitation stuck with me. It felt like a crossroads. Either I'd plaster on a fake grin and pretend things were fine, or I'd let the truth out, once and for all. At first, I was sure I'd skip it, give some excuse about work. But then it occurred to me, Kay had been lying to everyone for who knows how long, and I was tired of being her enabler. If I went, I'd have an audience to back me up or at least witness how much damage she'd caused. In some twisted way, I think I needed that validation. I couldn't ignore the video burning a hole in my phone. Every time I thought about seeing her parents, people who had treated me like a son, I felt a spark of righteous anger. Why should they keep thinking Kay was this doting wife who could do no wrong? Part of me thought it might help me heal if I laid it all on the table, no more secrets. But another part was worried about the fallout. Would I be stooping too low? Would it just hurt people who didn't deserve to be hurt? Ultimately, I decided I had to do something. Carrying this secret alone was eating me alive. Maybe it was petty, maybe it was cruel, but I also felt it was the only way I could reclaim any sense of power in a situation where I'd been nothing but blindsided and humiliated. My decision was made. I was going to that party, and I was bringing the truth, raw and unfiltered, with me. Looking back, I'm not sure if it was my best move or my worst, but at the time, it felt like my only option. I'd spent too long choking on lies, and if Kay wasn't going to own up to what she did, I was ready to show everyone exactly who they were dealing with. It was time for all of us to stop pretending. The day of the party arrived, and I was a storm of nerves. The house was buzzing with relatives and neighbors, all chatting about vacations and work promotions like it was just another happy family gathering. Kay's parents were thrilled to see us, giving me big hugs and telling me how grateful they were we could come celebrate. Meanwhile, I could barely manage a polite nod. It was like being trapped in some twisted dream where everyone was smiling except me. Kay seemed uneasy too, though she put on a decent show. She asked me several times if I was okay, probably sensing the tightness in my jaw and the tremor in my hands. I just kept it together long enough to respond with vague mumbles. I knew what I was about to do would cause a massive blow-up, but every time I hesitated, I'd remember the messages, the video, her betrayal. That memory gave me the push I needed. Halfway through the afternoon, people started gathering in the living room to watch a slideshow of family photos. It was something her parents loved to do. Reminisce with old pictures, share laughs and stories. It was both heartwarming and excruciating to watch. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I could feel the phone in my pocket, the video queued up and ready. I told myself, if you're going to do this, do it now. Once the slideshow ended and there was a lull in conversation, I quietly slipped my phone into the projector setup. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I tapped the file, took a deep breath, and then let it play. At first, The screen showed a few blurry seconds where you couldn't quite see anything. People looked confused, expecting a family memory. Then, as the image became clear, you could hear a collective gasp. The video wasn't explicit in a graphic way, but it was obvious what was happening. Kay and her affair partner, being far too close for any friendship. It felt like an eternity passed in those few seconds. Some people screamed, others went dead silent. Kay's mother cried out in shock, and her father looked absolutely gutted. The whole room turned into a chaos of startled voices and pointed fingers. Kay lunged at the projector, trying to turn it off, frantically yelling, "Stop! Stop!" But the damage was already done. I could barely breathe. I didn't feel triumphant or satisfied. I just felt numb. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times, but the reality was a wave of horror, confusion, and heartbreak for everyone watching. When the screen finally went black, there was a stunned silence. Kay's parents demanded an explanation, tears welling in their eyes. I stood there, phone in hand, trying not to collapse under the weight of what I'd done. I pulled the trigger on a bombshell, and now we were all left in the wreckage. For a moment, I felt the urge to run out of the house and never look back. But part of me also felt a twisted sense of release. I wasn't carrying this secret alone anymore. The aftermath was ugly, but as I looked around and saw the shock and heartbreak on Kay's parents' faces, I realized this was my line in the sand. She'd betrayed our marriage, and everyone deserved to know who she really was, or at least, who she had become. It was brutal, yes, and far from graceful. But I was done feeling powerless. That was the moment I truly accepted things would never be the same, for any of us. As soon as the video ended, the room fell into a stunned, suffocating silence. Kay's parents looked at her like she was a stranger. Her mom clutched her chest, tears streaming down her face, while her dad kept opening and closing his mouth as if trying to form words that wouldn't come. Nobody knew what to do or where to look. Kay broke down first, sobbing and trying to explain to her parents that she'd made a mistake, that things had gotten out of hand. Her voice cracked as she stumbled through apologies, alternately begging me to talk this out and telling her parents that we were going to fix things. I stood by the projector, feeling like my body was made of lead. I wanted to scream at her, to ask how she thought we'd ever come back from this, but I couldn't even summon the energy. My head was spinning. Some of the relatives looked at me with pity. Others glared like I just orchestrated a cruel public spectacle, which, let's be honest, I kind of had. It wasn't a proud moment. But I also couldn't apologize, not after everything she'd done. The moment was too raw, too painful. Within minutes, people started leaving. Conversations scattered into hushed whispers as they exited the house, like they were trying to escape a toxic cloud. Kay's parents were left devastated in the living room, while Kay herself stood in the middle of it all, sobbing into her hands. I forced myself to walk over to her parents, stammering some half-baked apology for the shock I'd caused. Her dad just shook his head and said, "It's not your fault, son," which nearly broke me. I'd always loved that he called me son, and now the word felt like a final goodbye to the family I'd once hoped to be part of forever. I left soon after, my head throbbing and my heart weighed down by 1,000 regrets. Whatever satisfaction I thought I'd feel from exposing Kay was replaced by a dull ache. The truth was out, but the damage was catastrophic. I kept telling myself there was no good way to handle betrayal. Any choice I made would lead to pain. But it still stung to see how it played out in real time, in front of people who cared about us. Over the next few days, Kay and I barely communicated. She stayed at her parents' house, trying to patch things up with them. I got a few angry texts from some of her relatives, saying I'd humiliated Kay unnecessarily. But I also received messages from people who thanked me for being honest, for not letting the facade continue. I didn't know what to think of any of it. All I knew was that I felt empty, like I'd lost the version of my life I thought was real. Through it all, one odd sense of relief settled in. I wasn't harboring her secret anymore. I didn't have to pretend. The betrayal was out in the open, and we could stop trying to slap a bandage over something that was fundamentally broken. It was a harsh sort of freedom, but maybe it was the only real path forward from here. After a couple of weeks, filled with sleepless nights, tense phone calls, and the occasional meltdown. I decided to move out of the apartment we'd shared. I didn't know if we were headed for divorce or if we'd attempt therapy, but I needed space. More than that, I needed a chance to breathe somewhere that didn't remind me of every happy memory turned sour. Kay tried texting me apologies, then anger, then apologies again. I stopped responding. I just couldn't handle the back and forth anymore. I told her she could keep the place if she wanted. I didn't care about the furniture or our knickknacks. Everything felt tainted. I packed a couple of suitcases and left, staying with a close friend until I could figure out a more permanent plan. Her parents reached out to me, too, apologizing for any nasty messages I'd received and assuring me they were sorting through their own heartache. It was clear they loved Kay and wanted to support her, but they were also deeply hurt by what she'd done and how she'd lied about it all. I told them I appreciated their concern but needed some time to distance myself from everything. They understood, and I think we found a fragile sense of mutual respect in that moment. Now, I'm focusing on rebuilding myself, financially, emotionally, and mentally. Betrayal is a violent wake-up call, and no matter how dramatic my act of revenge was, I still have to face the aftermath. If there's any silver lining, it's that I know the truth and don't have to live under the weight of suspicion anymore. It's devastating, but at least it's honest. For anyone reading this who's been in a similar situation, all I can say is, trust your instincts and don't punish yourself for someone else's betrayal. People will judge you no matter how you handle it, but ultimately you have to do what you can live with. If I could go back in time, maybe I'd handle things more discreetly. Or maybe I wouldn't, because as messy as it was, that moment in her parents' living room was the first time I felt like I wasn't lying to myself. It still hurts. Part of me will always wish I'd never seen that video. But if you ask me whether I'd rather live in blissful ignorance or know the ugly truth, I'd choose the truth every single time, even if it means facing the hardest road I've ever walked.
Bye.